Good morning, everyone. Are we awake with the arts? Sorry, I had to say it. So we're going to let people, if you're getting your coffee, please refresh. We're really excited. I want to thank Jay Stavesky for his wonderful performance this morning on the classical guitar. Jay is one of our musicians who works with us in many capacities. He's performed for the Classical Guitar Society, which we fund, but most recently he's been involved in the Art Heals palliative music program up at Geisinger that the county is one of the sponsors of. 2 days a week we have musicians playing music outside the ICU unit for the families, friends, and staff, and even some of the patients sometimes invite them in. So that's a really nice program. So we thought it would be nice to feature Jay today as one of our amazing local artists. So welcome. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy days. I'm Mari McGuigan, the Deputy Director of Arts and Culture for Lackawanna County. For maybe some of the new people in the audience who don't know, we are lucky here in this county. We have a arts and culture tax. We do like to call it a fee because it sounds better, but it is a good thing. The money goes towards supporting arts and culture organizations, artists, programs like this, festivals, if any of you have been to Arts on the Square, or go to the holiday market. So it's a really good thing for our community. And all of you are part of that. We fund many of you, we work with many of you in the audience. So I just wanted to mention that. And if anybody wants any more information about our department, happy to talk to you. We have a grant program coming up, which some of you will probably be applying for. There are applications over there. If you weren't aware of it, it's due next week. You can come and talk to us about it. It's never too late. We may even give you an extension if you're new. So yeah, there's a lot going on. This program is 9 years old. Wow. So it's one of my favorites. I mean, I love all our programs, but I love to see how this one has grown. And we've moved it around, but we're back in the Trolley Museum where we started. So, which is kind of cool because you can also see the John Oliver train, which is in the next room. So, yeah, that was a big hit last week. If you haven't seen it, go on YouTube and just type in John Oliver train, and it's pretty funny. So I do have a couple thank yous before we get started. I definitely want to thank Chris Calvi, our program manager. I don't know where he is. He's amazing. Oh, he's over. He's being shy. Wayne Hiller, he might be hiding too, but the trolley staff does a great job getting this place ready. They make it look effortless, but actually last night there was a Steamtown VIP meeting, and then they had to transform the whole place. So we're grateful for their help. Endeavor, as always, does a great job for our sound and provides this lovely television. Electric City Television is here, Mark McGlory. For those who can't be here, they'll get to watch it on TV. Also, Posh did the catering. I know they've left, but they're just great. So we're really thrilled to have that. Just a couple of other things. I want to talk a little bit about, we're going to get to our speaker here shortly, Mitchell Rasor, but last year we did a series of roundtables on art and other disciplines. Many of you participated. So we did health, transportation, environment, and economy. So the idea for this year's speaker kind of grew out of that. We decided that we really wanted to connect it to some of the issues that came out of that. So we decided to focus on something with environment or urban planning. So, and I also forgot a big thank you. We do have an advisory council on the arts. So again, without them, none of this would happen. They volunteer their time to organize things. Everything, we're trying to develop some cultural tourist opportunities, which if anybody's interested in being on that committee, you can let me know. To grant review to our event planning committee, many of who are here today. So we work all year long on these workshops, and we have a short list, and then we select our speaker. So I just kind of want to give them a little shout out. Alicia Grega, Nada Gilmartin, Cole Hastings, Fran Pantuso, Megan Pasamato, Bob Savakinis, and Tanya Verkaitis. So if anybody wants to wave if you're here. So anyway, when we sat down, we said, let's really try to tie it to that. And the roundtable report should be coming out soon. We've compiled all the data and the ideas. So again, we selected the speaker based on that, and we also thought, let's add a workshop. Let's really, how can we make this program more than just, not that a lecture isn't great, but how can we really see the impact in our community? So many of you have signed up for the workshop afterwards. So, that's what we're kind of looking to go towards in the future. I also want to mention the Art Heals program at the hospital also came out of that, as well as we now have Morgan Walters. Can you wave? She is our intern. We haven't had this before. She's working on the art and health piece. So we're going to try to be developing programming for older adults in the community. So again, we are open to ideas, partners. If anybody would like to talk to Morgan afterwards, we're trying to build those programs. So I just mentioned that to kind of give a little history of the breakfast and where I think we're going in the future. It's so nice when our representatives take time out to come to these. It's really important. Oh, I do want to mention, I'm staring at Tassie's nice smile. We have two very special guests here today. Our partners and friends from the Pocono Arts Council. Many of you may know Tassie Gilbert, who runs the PCA program and Project Stream Grant program, and the new executive director has just started and joined us today, Julie Golan. So do you guys want to wave again? So. We're really thrilled to have them there, and we do partner together. They're always at our award ceremony, so it's really nice. So yeah, so it's nice to have people come to our community, and as I was saying, to have representatives who care about the arts. The commissioners are very committed to the arts and seeing how it builds the quality of life. So we have two people who just want to say a few words. Representative Sid Kavulich is here, and then we're going to have Tom Welby from Representative Flynn's office. So do you want to come up, Sid?
Maureen said this morning, would you like to say a few words? Maureen, does the Pope pray in the morning? Maureen has asked me to do an excerpt from a new one-man show, A Hip-Hop Day in the Life of Senator John Blake. Yeah, well, I will. Senator John Blake's right and left-hand man, Larry West, does a tremendous job for the senator, who covers such a big area. He's all over the place, and he's got a previous commitment this morning, so Larry is here, and I do have to acknowledge Larry for saving my life in German last night at the Flood Project meeting. But anyway, arts and culture. Let me give you an example. We have a caucus in Harrisburg, an Arts and Culture caucus. We have a meeting scheduled for next week. I get an email about the subject of the meeting, and they are going to give a report on the economic impact of arts and culture in Erie, Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, and Reading. So it immediately gets me aggravated. So I fire off a not so kind email, and I usually go with the flow. But my response was, we do have arts and culture in northeastern Pennsylvania. I would appreciate it if you would include us in the next presentation. And the email I got back, Maureen, you're going to be getting a call before next week's meeting to talk to you about what the impact is, because we are going to be included in that meeting next week. So we have some great arts and culture opportunities here in northeastern Pennsylvania and in Monroe County. We have some great young people who are involved in arts and culture, visual arts, performing arts. We have some great people who are enabling these young people and giving them the avenue to express themselves, to develop their talents. And all of you in this room play a role in that, in some small way. Keep doing what you're doing. We need the arts. We need arts and culture. We need these young people to continue to develop, to continue to flourish, and we need to keep pounding people over the head that we have a great area for all of these things right here in our big corner of the state. Thank you.
Sid is great. Sid and I have been friends for a long time, working in radio together a long time ago, and actually I was on the radio. Sid was a little kid at home listening to the radio. But I tend to speak more. Sid is a broadcaster. I tend to speak more in 30-second commercial length, so I promise you I won't be long. But I wanted to thank all of you for being involved in the arts and what you do for our community and how our community benefits from it. Sid talked to me yesterday about what he spoke of, the fact that Northeast Pennsylvania was omitted from that study that they were doing. He was so steamed. He just wouldn't let it go. And I'm glad to hear that it worked out well. And the arts does contribute just tremendously to the economic development of our region, and also the positive spirit that I think is changing of the Northeast. Years ago, if you moved here from LA, from Austin, from wherever it might have been, I think 90% of the people that you said, oh, I just moved here from Chicago, I just moved here from Austin, I just moved here from whatever, 90% of the people would say to you, oh, what are you doing here? And I think that has changed tremendously in the last 10 years or so, and a lot of it has to do with what you all do to contribute to the life that we have here in the Great Pocono Northeast. And I still refer to it as the Great Pocono Northeast. I think we are the Great Pocono Northeast. Scranton, Wilkes-Barre, I think, is the heart of the Pocono Northeast, but it's great. And I also want to thank Maureen and Chris and their staff and everything that they do for the county. I think that what this department does is a best practices model that could serve our country as what they do here. Just in the last few months, they had 2 different seminars free on social media, bringing in speakers, nationally recognized speakers like today, to talk to our people that want to take advantage of it about how to develop your social media presence. And it was terrific, and they're free, fabulous. And also, I have to get a little plug in for First Friday. Hopefully, you all will be around tonight. And if you don't participate in First Friday now as either a venue or an artist, and you would like to participate, we have people like Michael and Sherry from Kappa. A lot of the businesses downtown are always looking for someone to partner with. So if you have something, an idea, whether it's a static art or performance art, get in touch with any of the businesses downtown, and they'd be happy to host you. But Maureen, thank you for everything that you do.
Oh, thank you. I think that's good to hear. And again, Senator Blake could not be with us, and Larry's being very humble, but he does a lot of work. He and I have sat many times with napkins trying to come up with ideas on how to make the arts great. And it was nice for the roundtables. We did have our representatives and the senator participate, as well as the police chief. I think that's really complimentary of our community. But today is also about art and all of you. And although I don't have time to go through everybody's background and what you do, I hope that you do mingle, and if you don't know someone, get to know people. I do want to mention these beautiful tables. These are by our art. Let's give them a round of applause. I'm just going to mention, they are just gorgeous. So we have tables by the AFA Gallery, Everhart Museum, Gretchen Kohut, who's one of our Art in the Park artists, Julie Esty from the Dunmore Cemetery Tour, Ambience Event Planning, Kelly Moore, who's also one of our Art in the Park artists, Electric City Trolley Museum, our staff person Tom did that, Bob Savakinis, Rocky Glen Table, of course, Marywood, right there, the Greenhouse Project, the Pennsylvania American Water Company, a new one that really fits with our theme. Thank you, Maureen Duffy, for bringing them in. Verver 2 over here, who does a lot of great work in community arts, the Scranton Cultural Center. And then Kappa, we've featured at our registration table, which is the Creative Arts and Performing Academy, does a lot of great work. So we hope you had time to go around and look at all of them. So, you're probably tired of hearing me talk, because the main reason we are here today is for our fabulous speaker. And actually, I have to tell you, Cole Hastings, one of our event planning committee, was a student of his at the BFA program at Mecca, the Maine College of Art, and spoke very highly of him. So we had a personal reference, and I have to say he was right. Mitch is just a great guy. I mean, you can read, he has a wonderful bio here, so I won't read all of it. He is the principal of MRLD Landscape and Urbanism, and he has a research fellow at the University of Southern Maine and a guest critic at Bates College. He also, as I said, is an assistant professor at Mecca. He's very passionate. I enjoyed talking to him on the phone. You could just tell he lives and breathes this stuff. Very creative and a very laid back, just nice person, which is always good too. But I also just wanted to mention, because we always have the credentials, but but I love this. He's the father of twin girls. He just told me they're 16, and he swims in the ocean from May to October. You're just a cool guy. And he also has 18 albums of music in the United States, Germany, England, Greece, Spain, and the Netherlands. So you're very multifaceted, and we're so glad that you made the trip down here. So I'm going to turn it over to you, and I guess I'm really bad with endings, so I'm just going to like... Oh, you need the red book, yeah. Okay.
Good morning, and thank you very much. Thanks, Maureen, and thank you, Cole, again, for inviting me. Everyone's been so friendly so far. And again, thanks to the Trolley Museum for having me. Of course, full disclosure, yes, about half the people I mentioned that I was coming here said, oh, John Oliver. So I will get my picture with the next door with that to be evidence of it. But it's wonderful to be in this facility and to visit Scranton. I love cities. Cities are my passion. And we just, we'll be talking about some of the projects in the office right now. And we just started a project in New Haven looking at the urban design around Union Station in New Haven, which is one of the most active Metro North and Amtrak stations in the Northeast. So that's a very exciting project for us. But since we just started that last week, I was just in New Haven exactly a week ago, sitting in meetings, and not nearly as festive as this, but just getting going on that. So today I'm going to start out with some big picture ideas about issues related to streets and cities and urban design, and talk about some of our projects. Some of it might be a little academic, some of it might be a little bit more engaging, but we'll sort of start at a higher level and then move into some more details. And then we can have some questions. So thank you again. Everyone's been very friendly who's come up prior to the talk. So again, I'm calling it street urbanism because I'm very interested in how streets really are, in some ways, especially coming as a landscape architect, the focus of what we can do with our cities in terms of civic space and making places engaging for economic development, for more walkability, for character of place, and the general health of the population. So streets are really, a typology or that goes back a long, long way, and we can even see, as early as Pompeii, poor Pompeii, had a fascinating relics of streets if you visit there now. And you can see here a picture of the streets. The basic form of what you would see in a street even today. Little differences, the sidewalks, the central street, in this case a raised crosswalk, and you can see the grooves from the carts. And I think the street here was used mainly as a drainage type system, so they had to have stepping stones to get over it. But in general, going way, way back, you can see that streets have a form that we can learn from. And so in my profession, we're always looking back at the past to both learn from what's happened, to try to build on those things, as well as, of course, we can also find what we now see sometimes maybe as mistakes and learn from our mistakes. Because as planners, we always have best intentions, but those times do change, so we have to be dynamic and in flux and design always to keep up with current needs of culture and cities. So streets are really places for civic engagement, economic development, artistic expression, more and more places for urban ecology, design innovation, and smart mobility, which really is looking at ways for multimodal streets, places where you can make streets more efficient. And in general, I'd like to also, in general, like to consider streets as we consider sort of a energy efficient home, And we're all used to that idea now, how a home can be efficient and provide good return and on your dollar for your heating and a healthy environment. Streets also, I think, can be high performance, energy efficient, high efficient aspects of a city and provide to the sort of high performance cities and the quality of place. So I'd like to look at cities and streets with their sort of performative nature. And here we have an 1890 map of Scranton, where we are today. You have, of course, Lackawanna, you have Roaring Brook coming down, you have the location where we are right here, Steamtown. But what you really see is to the east, northeast, the grid that was filling out and expanding, and then across the river and down below the grid. So you can see the downtown core in the grid, and that grid is really there. And that grid is really the framework for streets, and it's what I call sort of the framework for growth. And I really think some of our best cities, start out with a wonderful street grid, and then that's filled in over time with buildings, parks, and different types of uses to create, like I said, that framework for growth and guide that growth and provide an orientation once you're in the city for the future of the city and for how it's used every day. But really, you can then move forward to a Google Maps image from just last year, and you can see fundamentally, Scranton is intact. It's really great. You can still see Roaring Brook. There's some roads that come along it. You can see the Steamtown area that's now transferred more from industry to heritage. You have the Heritage Trail and Lackawanna River along the other side. And you have the downtown areas sort of feathering out. And then the wonderful, exciting geology of this area sort of shaping the region, coming up through it from the northeast sort of expression. So the grid really here, you're quite fortunate that it's remained intact and it's part of your heritage. Just as this is part of your heritage, your downtown street grid is really part of your heritage. And it's, of course, changed over time. The uses that have changed. But in general, that grid is intact. And so I love a good grid, and I love visiting cities. I love visiting cities all over the world and seeing different types of grids. They really can change. There's a whole variety of types of grids, but they're very important for the nature of the city, and they do impact the everything from the tax base to walkability and livability of the area. Just a quick couple comparisons on types of grids, and this is a source from Strong Towns. But so what I wanted to point out here is sort of the granular aspect of grids and connectivity. So on the left, and hopefully you can see this, we have Portland, Oregon, and then on the right we have Salt Lake City. And what's important about these is that you can see that and these are both scaled at the same size, about 0.15 miles. So that's about a 15-minute walk, from one side to the other. But the key things to point out are the street widths are 60 versus 130, and really your ideal street width, you want to be about 50 to 60 feet. Manhattan, for example, is 58 feet. And of course, Manhattan is also very, very vertical, but the amount of activity at the street level is so active that you're really engaged at the street level and you're not too overwhelmed by the height of the city. The grid is 200 by 200 versus 660 by 660. And then you can see that the street area, while is 40, almost 41% to 30%, and the block area is reduced. I'm going to say the trade-offs are significantly. I would prefer to probably live in Portland, Oregon, for several reasons. Yes, there's more streets, therefore public infrastructure to maintain, but from a walkability perspective and street frontage perspective, you have a lot more dynamic street frontage. And when someone's walking, we've found in the profession that people generally liked a block length of approximately between 2 and 450 feet, 400 feet. After that, they start to get a little, they're looking for that sort of next potential turn and route through a way. People like options as you move through it. And that's if you're driving, biking, or walking. So as you can see with Portland, Oregon, if you're going from one corner to the other diagonally, you have many more options to get through the city versus, say, Salt Lake City in that same amount of area. So Portland, Oregon has a lot more sort of urban diversity, and that diversity, metaphorically can relate to sort of a sociological, economic, ecological type diversity that you're probably not going to see in Salt Lake City. You can also just look at this and see that Salt Lake City is probably more car-oriented, auto-oriented, and that Portland, Oregon is probably going to be more pedestrian-oriented just because of the scale of it. It's brought down to sort of the scale of the person versus Salt Lake City, which is, the person. You can see this in this sort of diagram that the scale of the person is, sort of out of size with the city. And this type of thing is interesting because it should be noted that, just with the arts, as the sort of fundings and things are shifting and the markets are shifting, it's the same thing in our profession. We're now being asked and getting funding from different sources, such as like the CDC, Health and Human Services, and other types of granting agencies to really look at how can you make cities healthier? How can you make them more walkable? How can you encourage people to engage with the city? A lot of people are saying, how do you bring populations back to the cities? And that's a big discussion with millennials, of course. So how do you re-strengthen the city? And really re-strengthening the city grid, looking at as many two-way streets as possible, sidewalks, bicycle lanes, things like that, really make the city more friendly. So where does Scranton stand in this? Your street grid, depending what neighborhood it is, about 200 to 400, or in the downtown core, about 450 to 450. So it's pretty walkable. There's some blocks that have some longer buildings, which aren't as friendly, but in general, it's a very porous and friendly city to pedestrians. And I think the street grid has really served you well here, and should be a great base to continue as you move on to the future. Here's just some pictures. I didn't get a chance to come as early as I wanted to yesterday, so I grabbed some pictures of the web. Here's an early picture from Lackawanna. You can see basically the fundamental nature of the street is really the same today, except the uses have changed. Here, this is turn of the century. You see horses and carriages and people walking, but the building scale and the street width is approximately the same. And really that ratio is pretty ideal. And then here from 66, this is looking down Lackawanna. I'm not sure exactly what vantage point this is, but it's looking downhill towards the river. You can just start to begin to see that general cross section of building to street is the same. Of course, you're now having much more automobiles, some pedestrian amenities, and there's the introduction of on-street parking and other things like that help make the street more diverse, and not just for moving cars, but for accommodating cars and people for a variety of reasons. I would be remiss in my research to not mention that I was very excited to find out that Jane Jacobs was born and raised in Scranton. I'm not sure how many people here know about Jane Jacobs. I guess many of you do. Well, of course, she's one of my heroes, or as my daughters would quickly point out, sheroes. She's a huge shero of mine, and I was very excited to find out she was born and raised in Scranton, and graduated from Scranton High before moving to New York City, and then eventually on to Toronto. But she really was fundamentally, in the 60s, and her work continues to echo through planning and design and the health of contemporary thinking about cities through today. One of the great citizen planners, so she really did demonstrate that, anyone can really step forward and make a huge difference in shaping our cities and encourage and look at bottom-up growth versus top-down growth. She, of course, wrote the seminal book, The Death and Life of Great American Cities. It came out in '61, and this was really sort of captured her life living in Greenwich Village and sort of the battle between her and, as Anthony Caro has called him, Robert Moses, the power broker, who really sort of epitomized top-down planning and sort of I guess no simple way to put it, the destruction of neighborhoods for highways and sort of the suburbanization of many of the New York, and which then led to many other cities having similar types of major urban renewal projects that, in retrospect, probably did more harm than good. This was just a picture, from Lower Manhattan of the cross Manhattan arterials he envisioned, and I can pretty much assure you that these, versus these sort of side local streets, these large red arterials, which don't get me wrong, it's important to serve the car and the surrounding suburbs, but these definitely served not the local population so much, and I would not want to live in this existing tower here with a new cloverleaf put around that. So the bridge and tunnel crowd is very important, of course, for Manhattan, but fortunately it was left more at bridge and tunnel and not so much bridge, tunnel, and sort of superhighway, except up north for sort of the Cross Bronx Expressway, which was put through. But that has more to do with sort of social equity, because Jane Jacobs wasn't there. That type of representation from the community wasn't there to sort of fight the top-down type planning. But down in Greenwich Village, there was sort of the social equity to fight this type of project and move through that. So in general, you're very fortunate that, from what I can gather, that Scranton has not suffered from major urban renewal projects, and you have good access into your city, and then your downtown core is still quite wonderful. And then in recent years, cities like San Francisco with the Embarcadero have, this is 2002, and then a few years later, you can see there's a lot of trends all through the United States. Even my hometown of Rochester, New York is doing this, where they're burying raised highways and putting them below grade and creating more of a unity. There was a general trend, I would say, sort of in transportation planning to do separation of uses and keep people at one level, cars at one level, maybe transportation at a different level, and then also zoning by lack of mix of uses. Nowadays the trend is much more to bring everything back together again into a mix, have a street with a whole range of uses, and rather than separating things out, and reunify the city. And it's really proving to be quite manageable and feasible for a lot of these cities. Of course, under this new park is probably a buried highway, but they were able to also create surface mobility to maintain that, and then reintroduce new green space and reknit back to the downtown with the waterfront. Closer to home, and a project that I've worked on, and I'll talk about a little bit more in specific, is the Franklin Arterial Project. And this Victor Gruen, who worked throughout the United States, and I would say had, just as Frederick Law Olmsted in the 19th century had his incredible influence on shaping cities through park design, and really worked throughout the United States. And Victor Gruen came along later and probably had an equal impact on shaping cities, not necessarily in the looked upon now in the most favorable light, but really at the time using what they thought was what was best for cities. So a lot of slum clearance, the introduction of major arterials that crossed peninsulas or cut through cities. So for the example here, they were just building a new 295 in Portland at the base, and they wanted to basically connect across the peninsula from the new exit across to the major ferry terminal on the other side of the peninsula. But in doing so, created an enormous swath of land that's really, up until this day, been seen as a big gash in the city. So a number of years ago, we were hired to basically what the name of the report was actually Reclaiming Franklin Street. So we've redesigned Franklin from this point back to the ferry terminal, and we're trying to knit that back into the city fabric and try to reintroduce slowly the existing sort of fabric of this historic image here of neighborhoods. But this project we'll touch on a bit later. But another thing to point out here is you can see that, again, there's sort of a suburbanization that happened with the city. This was really put in to enable people in surrounding suburbs to get in and out of the city quickly to the business core. And it did allow that, but at whose expense? At, of course, the locals' expense, and many, many people were displaced. And at the same time that sort of suburbanization of the urban core happened with the city, you can see to the right, larger footprint buildings started to go in, and buildings that were really not at the scale of the historic city. And a lot of those buildings are there today and are sort of impediments for redevelopment and sort of revitalization at a pedestrian scale. But slowly there's been a movement for some of these buildings to come down, the street grid to be reintroduced, and for healthier type walkability to be introduced. So that's very exciting that this is happening. So, and there's been some master planning efforts that I've been involved with, but there's also been a lot of sort of bottom up, which is very exciting. I better get hurrying up here. So I just wanted to, in terms of suburbanization, just compare. So here's downtown. Here's on the bottom images a wonderful coastal community in Maine called Belfast, Maine. And just to give you an idea, this wonderful downtown basically fits in another area where we've been asked to help called North Wyndham, which is basically Lowe's and Staples and Walmart, and you've seen these malls, you have them on the periphery of your cities. But basically, this entire historic downtown that's absolutely lovely, generates great money, has wonderful architecture, diverse arts, is on the water, open spaces. Is really a national draw for people either coming by sea or up the land. Can fit in the footprint of sort of the sprawl. And quite frankly, what's happening with the up north, up above, that area is what we call sort of a grain area and is actually failing they asked us to look at retrofitting that into how could it be more like Belfast. And then Belfast, which had harder times, is now booming and seeing a renaissance in sort of food culture and boatyards and tourism and regional farming. So what was once seen as the ideal, this is now the ideal again. And North Windham can only wish that they had what Belfast had in terms of density and street connectivity and grids. So moving through a couple projects now, getting a little bit more specific. In Auburn, Maine, working along the Androscoggin River, Auburn and Lewiston, we had a traditional grid, but then a couple spots here and here, that grid was severed and history was changed. So we were asked to sort of come in and help them rethink their grid and rethink their city and their waterfront. So we actually, it seems sacrilegious at first, but we're willing to look at things from a new perspective, took out a couple sections of the grid that the town, the city controlled as land right away, and created a new plan, and those areas then became either redevelopment sites or internal parking for blocks, and we reoriented the blocks along the waterfront to the river in order to address floodplain issues, to address the fact that they had gone from an industrial past to now a more heritage and tourism and sort of creative economy culture. So we're trying to foreshadow that. And another major move we did was we actually embraced this grid rupture that was called Mill Street and created that as the main street. And it's hard to see, but there's a bridge sort of up in the middle, and currently you have to sort of go through the middle of downtown and then cross that bridge to Lewiston, and we've shifted that bridge down to sort of the front as a gateway. So traffic that's going to Lewiston will be diverted before you get to the downtown, and then we're proposing to use the sort of the remnants of that first part of the bridge as sort of a sculptural gesture sticking into the river. And this just shows where the 100-year floodplain is in that area, which severely limits development and insurance issues with the developers in the area. So we're also asked to address that and how we can deal with that. So we, of course, had to propose bring in fill to raise some of that up. But one major area is something here I wanted to address called the Riverway, where we specifically addressed a new type of development, addressing the river, embracing floodplain issues, and creating really almost like a 19th century promenade that deals with 21st century ecological, economic development and insurance issues. Here's the proposed new approach with the bridge intersection off to the right and an infill building right at the center with sort of a focal point, creating a new intersection as you're coming into that area. Here's just a layover drawing of the new Main Street with infill buildings on left and right. Currently it's sort of parking lots on the left or right. And then again back to that plan view of this area here. And this is looking sort of along that floodplain and the Androscoggin River in the back of it. And then what is currently being engineered, which is raising the buildings up out of the floodplain so they will not flood for resiliency purposes, and also so they can be, so that land gains back value and can be, and those buildings can be insured. And then creating a park with stepped seeding that can flood at different flood stages and be protected. So there's sort of a graduation or gradation and flexibility to this edge of the city now. Instead of being a hard edge, just a simple hard edge to the city pretty much now embraces seasonal changes with flooding, and the green space becomes a part of a piece of green infrastructure that embraces change and in the city has a new street and promenade and key open space that'll be a major driver for economic development. So as I mentioned, this is now being engineered, and most of the buildings in that area have been bought. They're not of the greatest quality, so they've been bought, and a number have already been taken down in anticipation of the Riverway. Just to be a little geeky, and I've probably been too geeky already, when we do things like this, it's not just pretty pictures and ideas. We are required to sort of analyze it. So we did actually 7 or 8 different options for this 18-acre area, focus area around the river, and looked at everything from existing residential and proposed residential and residential densities and commercial densities and required parking and different off-street and on-street parking to help them create a sort of evaluation matrix to understand the pros and cons of what we were proposing. Now I'm moving on to Rockland. Rockland's a waterfront city, and it's really an exciting place we've been working for years. It's the Farnsworth Museum is there, and another museum designed by Toshiko Mori out of New York, which we collaborated on, just opened. But we help them with their waterfront redevelopment plan. We do a lot of waterfront planning in Maine and throughout New England. So here's Main Street, and then here's the waterfront district with wharves and piers and absolutely a gem of one of the best harbors in the Northeast, just incredible harbor. We first start out by mapping sort of future potential views from Main Street, and then so north and south and east and west across, and understanding view sheds and sort of just overlaying that over the area. And then from there, that started to inform how we could create a new urban street grid at the scale of the downtown. So expand the downtown, but do it in a manner that we're creating efficient development blocks that are walkable, that will encourage growth to happen sort of in an organized manner, all while maintaining the edges for the working waterfront and public access. A previous master plan was done for this sort of in the 80s, and to be quite frank, the middle was basically looked like a shopping mall, and the edges looked like condos on a golf course. And it was really just shows you how this, the city pretty much, it was, a picture tells 1,000 words. The moment we sort of pointed that out to them, that they were basically introducing a golf course condo scenario with a shopping mall in the middle, they immediately realized that, oh no, we actually want a downtown here with, vertical mixed use with housing above, and not horizontal mixed use, but more like vertical mixed use. So we're going to focus in on, this is the Farnsworth Museum, which is famous for all the Wyeth paintings, and we're going to focus on this street called Winter Street, and how it has wonderful views down to the harbor, and some of the changes we've been working on there, specifically related to something called shared space streets. So here's some pictures of just some of the proposed before and afters. But one thing I wanted to point at was with shared space streets, we do look at, like I said at the beginning, we look at history all the time for precedents. And in this case, this is a project we're working on Chebeague Island right now, because they have a beautiful pier that's, their connection to the mainland with their ferry service and lobstering and transient boaters, and there's a boutique hotel on the island. But really that is, even though it's a pier and it only sticks out in the water so far, it is their bridge to the mainland. That is their vital sort of economic driver and sort of civic space. But looking back at sort of the turn of the century, you can see these you can see that this pier, you can see the granite cribbing and the ocean to the far side of the picture, really did function like a street. It had cars driving on it. It had, here's a wonderful, looks like grandmother and child, another car. It had buildings on the pier. It really felt like a street. There's other pictures of the stone pier, and it had really the quality of extending the town down into the waterfront. And it's been a great inspiration we've seen this in a lot of different places where there was a mix of uses, there was not this sort of division of uses, and so this really has the appearance of a street. And if I probably didn't tell you it was a pier, you might have said, oh, this is a street. But it's really a street, but what it doesn't have is, and something we'll get to in a moment, is division of things like sidewalks and other things. It's really a space where everyone moves at a very slow speed, and people are conscious of each other and considerate of each other, and there's the opportunity to work with each other. So the reason we're working with the community is because sea level rise, regardless of what you hear, is real. This pier is overtopping, and we're helping them look at strategies to raise it by about 4 to 5 feet, to anticipate about a 70-year build out for change, and to accommodate basically the viability of this island surviving. So shared space streets that's a concept. You also probably hear of complete streets, but shared space streets is something that we're slowly introducing more and more into communities. We have 2 under construction in Maine right now, our office, but they really started out in the Netherlands, and you'll find them in places more like UK. But the idea really is to strip away street signage, strip away sidewalks, and have some things like street trees and other amenities like lights and whatnot, but really create an environment where everyone sort of feels like it's sort of a shared, exactly, it's a shared place, a shared civic area where cars can park, cars can drive, FedEx can come, people can bike, people can walk, you can have cafes, you can have businesses. So this street used to have your typical curb section and road, and then it was retrofitted like this. And it's not just a pedestrian way. It's like you'd see maybe in Burlington, Vermont, which has been successful into its own right. And there was a movement, and Ithaca has them, and the other cities did, where they literally closed down streets, made them pedestrian only. You know, we're more interested in how streets can be, diverse places. I talked about sort of ecology, where you have a mix of things, and it's not a single use. It's not a monoculture. Here we're looking at a diversity of cultures, diversity of uses, and the proof is that people drive slower, there's less accidents, there's more flexibility, businesses remain open, the maintenance can still be done, but boy, is it a lot of education, a lot of hand-holding, and good and bad coffee with Public Works directors. Always Public Works. You have to work with Public Works all the time and educate. But these streets are not legal. They're not legal here. You can't just propose to build a street like this in Scranton. We certainly can't do them in Maine. So wherever we are building them, they are not to current zoning codes. So we have to go through a process of getting variances from the councils and different governing bodies to create streets like this. So this is that one street behind us. This is in Rockland, back to Rockland. Behind us is the Farnsworth. This building is now ripped down and is now a wonderful contemporary art museum that's doing very, very well. And in the distance is the view to the harbor, and that's eventually going to be realigned to a street. So currently it's just about a 30-something foot wide street with high speeds, two-way, but we propose to take that and make it a more, I think this is the next image, more, narrow that street down to about 18 feet. The museum has been entered in, get rid of the curbing on this side. We had to maintain it on one side due to drainage technicalities, but you can really see that the introduction of the new buildings, the sidewalks, 2 new buildings are proposed in this area. It's really created what's much more like almost like an alleyway, but has the flexibility still to handle, and we've done all sorts of tests with cones, 18-wheeler trucks, FedEx, everything. We don't build anything until we sort of test it out. We do sort of temporary painting on the ground, And so this project is actually moving forward. Most of the expensive infrastructure done, and now all the pretty things are done. In terms of integrating the arts into the street, and we'll get to that in a minute, this doesn't have to necessarily be street trees. These could be sculptures along this location. But we do consider this sort of the arts walk, because it really connects the Farnsworth to the CMCA, the new art center, to the waterfront, which is the park. And then this is just along that brick wall. Last summer, they needed a temporary sort of way of testing out the width of that street. So we did about a 90-foot long curving galvanized planter connecting the Farnsworth to the CMCA, just to test that out and have some fun. It was a very inexpensive, what we call tactical urbanism, a sculptural intervention in the street, and it was very successful and playful and fun, and they've now been relocated to different parts of the city and used as planters. What you can't see here is Robert Indiana, very famous Robert Indiana sculptures just on top of the Farnsworth just to the right, and as you turn your head, you see a well-known Jonathan Borofsky sculpture in the courtyard of the CMCA, and this is at one of the events, and really as the courtyard was designed, it's meant to spill out onto the street, and eventually the pavers of the courtyard will spill out onto the street, and it's going to be a very fluid space that is very welcoming and draws people down from Main Street to the CMCA, and then draws them further on down to the waterfront. So there's really a line of sight from the Robert Indiana Eat sculpture on top of the Farnsworth to this Jonathan Borofsky, and there's a great, because we've also changed the design of the street, it's a very welcoming connection. And then just a couple of quick ones. This is just off the coast of Rockland, looking at resiliency. We do a lot of these quick studies for towns, but this happens to be an area that's projected to be flooding, and future flood levels would take you up to about the top of the ramp of that building. So we just do some quick visualizations with communities to help them visualize what some fill or variations could look like, or how the street could become more friendly. So here's before and after with fill and mitigation efforts. So the harbor's to the left, and this is Vinyl Haven. It's just a wonderful island in the Penobscot Bay off the coast from Rockland. Wonderful arts and mainly lobstering community. And then we looked at another spot further up, if you're going up the hill. Robert Indiana's actually studio and house is just to the left here. He lives in New York, and in this amazing old building he bought in the 60s. So they asked us to look at a couple of different spots, like 5 or 6 different spots along Main Street, and what possibly could be done to make them mitigation for stormwater, for sea level rise, as well as to try to make things more pedestrian friendly and defined. So we also looked at this area and how you could recapture some of what was sort of gray area or dead space and turn that into pedestrian space without losing parking. And here we recommended using porous pavers, so there would be water would go into cisterns and be maintained and would help mitigate the flooding of the area. You can, of course, and I wanted to show his famous love sculpture here. It didn't make it quite into the rendering, but you can see how there's really no curb, and there's a fluid aspect to the street and the sidewalk, and we've regained in front of these businesses sort of what was once a space that was not used, a space that can now be an active part of the community. Just another example of this is in Biddeford, an industrial mill town that we do a lot of work in southern Maine. It's got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of square feet of mill space that's slowly being filled up. For example, this mill right here is being currently turned into housing and with sort of boutique restaurants on the roof. There's a lot of changes. This is City Hall. That bank is now sort of a funky high-end restaurant. So we're looking at this square here, right in the middle, this intersection of Main and sort of Lincoln Street. Currently, you're coming down the hill this way. There's a curve on the road, high crash location, not very unified. sort of visually disjointed, and they wanted a design that would pull things together, create a sort of more traditional downtown square, and create an equalizer between pedestrians and vehicles and more safety. So our solution was really to reach out and grab the buildings around it and impose in plan view a square in the area while still maintaining the streets, and then the approaches to that square would slowly ramp up. So, and then there would be a level area in the central square area where as cars got into that area, you had defined by bollards and street trees, but really, again, it was a shared space, an equalizer between all the different areas. So this is an implementation phase as well. And this is a very exciting project for us because to look, sort of re-envision a city core, to look at improving safety, and to creating a place that can be closed off and used transformed very readily for celebrations and make it a very pedestrian-friendly zone without actually a lot of cost involved in doing this. The existing curb lines remain. We sort of just lift up the street. You raise some catch basins and voila, it's another view of that. And then I'm trying to wind down here. This is a very nerdy type picture, but we also we don't always work in downtowns. This is a suburban corridor or strip mall area. We first started by studying these sub-watersheds in the area and understanding impervious surface. In summary, the area, we're looking for economic development in the area, but because of all the parking and buildings, the DEP was starting to say that this area really could not see much more development unless extensive money was spent on stormwater mitigation. So economic development was being slowed down. It was not really attractive. It wasn't pedestrian friendly. The zoning did not allow for really quote unquote village scale type development. So we ultimately developed a plan that was going to address all those issues at once, believe it or not, and it's moving forward, and it was probably the most ambitious sort of corridor. When I say that, it's like, basically I'm saying strip mall reconstruction in Maine. We ended up spending about $12 million on this stretch of road, and then at the same time retrofitting about 6 acres of parking lots with green infrastructure. So those areas are now being treated before that water is released to the mud flats in Casco Bay. So what we've in fact have done is sort of turn back the clock a bit and taken the pressure off, and now we're going to allow for more economic development to happen in that area while improving walkability, introducing transit, and introducing green infrastructure. So this is the existing sort of corridor. You see them all over the place. This is actually a photo simulation, not a actual construction photo, but it does actually look very much like this now, with green infrastructure and sidewalks and buses and buildings have been introduced through the area. And of course, we also had to rewrite the zoning for this whole area for this to happen. We don't just make the pictures and design the places. Our office also works with the towns to write the zoning to enable new types of streets, new setbacks, new densities, new mix of uses. We did an urban forestry plan for the corridor, documenting every single existing tree in the area, what type of tree, the canopy, trees that should stay, trees that should go, because urban forestry is very important for stormwater management. I won't read through this, but they have a huge impact for interception for stormwater, huge impact for soil infiltration, and for transpiration and consumption. So really the healthy urban forest that's well managed is not just attractive, but really is a sort of a machine, a tool, it can be part of your urban infrastructure for mitigating stormwater impacts. So there's a long-term planning plan as well for this area to really help it make it more attractive, as well as help it mitigate stormwater impacts, which will in turn allow for more economic development. We were asked to look at retrofitting some parking lots with more like street type environments. So we all have Staples don't we, somewhere? But here's a Staples. This is currently what's allowed, or what was allowed, and they asked us to say, okay, what if you took existing infrastructure and not reinvent the wheel, not spend money? This parking's already there, these liner buildings are already there, these sort of aisles and roads are already there. How can we promote infill development and do it in increase our tax base, make things more pedestrian friendly and walkable, while still, of course, handling parking ratios. So we did a visualization such as this, showing some infill with some loss of parking, but some gain on on-street parking, creating a more friendly place. And I'm happy to say that several of the commercial strips along this area are proceeding with infill development like this, and it really is making a difference. And I wish I had some of the constructed after photos to show you. And then finally, the last project to talk about today, and this has really been a fun one. It's been a big project, and I know I realized I didn't include one image, but this area here, sort of in the dashed outline, is about 260 acres of Portland. Let's see if I can point it out. Well, you can see a big swath here to here. That's that Franklin arterial that sort of chewed through the city, and it really made a division between the east end and the west end. And then this is the core of the downtown, and I would say that Cole spent a lot of time in this building right about there. That's also where I teach, basically where I zip in and zip out as fast as I can. Because running a busy practice and teaching is a fun balance. But so this is sort of the downtown, very active. Tonight is First Friday. It's basically become an absolute zoo on First Friday. It's this street. They don't even, you don't even try to close it down. You just don't even try to drive down it anymore. It's incredible what's happened. Their First Friday. They've actually started First Thursday now, because if you actually want to go see the art, you come out on First Thursday, because so many people are out on Friday just having fun. You go out on Thursdays to get into the galleries for their sort of soft opening and actually get to look at the work. And then Friday you can come down and it's all sorts of street performers, and it's quite a party scene, vendors. It's really quite exciting, and Maine College of Art is right in this downtown arts district, and a lot of the students set up shop right in the street. It's really quite fun. So to get back to this area, which is called Bayside, this 260-acre area, it's really, the peninsula slopes down into an area that's really in the floodplain, and there's been drastic flooding issues there. I did not include an image, but just as we started this study, where's Whole Foods? Let's see. Whole Foods is right here. So there's an intersection right here, and at there's an intersection right there at Franklin. And right as we started the study, they're like, oh, don't forget sea level rise as you're looking at this transportation urban design study. And we're like, oh, we won't forget. And of course, 2 weeks into the study, I drive down there, there's a massive rain event. And I get to this intersection, and it's sort of a low point in the area, and there's cars floating by. I mean, literally, it was about 5 feet deep. It was nothing. There was no loss of life. It was nothing like Houston or some of these other things we've seen. But when you've seen some pictures of, say, Houston or whatever, you're like, this is all very real, and you cannot deny these pictures anymore. I mean, so Whole Foods was actually smart, and they've come in recently. They actually built up about 4 feet. They had their designers and planners sort of anticipated that. A lot of this area floods. So one of the things I'm going to focus on here is something called Anderson Street. And I'm focusing on that because I'm going back to sort of Jane Jacobs and how things can happen organically, and how sort of sometimes the best things can happen because arts organizations sort of can come together and work together with the assistance of the city, but not necessarily the command of the city for an area to flourish. And I'll try to reach over and just point to it, if you can see, but it's called Anderson Street, and it really runs from street right here. So on the left side are a whole bunch of just plain, ugly, sort of industrial buildings that you'd just not write home about at all. You would not drive down that street 10 years ago and say, oh my gosh, this is it. And on the right side, you can start to see some smaller scale buildings. And really, what that signifies is actually a change in the grade, and it goes sort of from industrial up to residential uses. And I always, pretty much, my mantra is mixed use, housing up top, commercial or on the first floor, retail on the first floor, arts on the first floor, mix it up, make the most of it. So here I was proven wrong. The saving grace and what really made this area happen was those larger buildings to the left. That is in a zone, an industrial zone, where no housing is allowed. And Portland, many people are not aware, is next to San Francisco, has become, per ratio, in the last 5 years, the least affordable city to live in the United States. It's about a 20% jump between income and cost of housing. It's skyrocketed, and the number of units being built is incredible. I mean, it's just everywhere you go is new construction. So this is a pioneer on Anderson Street. This is actually an arts building. Those are actual Quonset huts on top. So this is a funky sort of building that was built. All artists live in it. It was developed by a sort of an artist affordable housing developer, and that's what he continues to do. That's his business. That's his spreadsheet to look at meeting that market and working with those types of tax credits. And that was a pioneer building, just like you have sort of a pioneer tree that comes into an area that's been cleared. But what you're really seeing on the right side of that street, out of that commercial area, and throughout the peninsula, are more and more buildings that are like this, which are, quite frankly, could be in Portland, Oregon, or Portland, Maine, or Boston, or anywhere. But they're fine. They have wonderful restaurants on the first floor. That actually has a bike co-op in it, and they're great mixed-use buildings. They're extremely expensive. I would love to be able to afford to, move back downtown. I live just outside of Portland in a quaint little Brigadoon Harbor community, really these units are now starting to top out between 300 up to some are now breaking 1.5 million. So that's, for Portland people, that's pretty steep. But it's, what I want to say is that on one side of the street you have housing that's happening with some mixed use, and on the left side you have really funky town that's growing from the bottom up, and some really interesting street things that are happening, art things that are happening, and different types of businesses that are happening. And really because the zoning doesn't allow for mixed use, and these artists and different types of uses, bike shops, mosques, breweries, coffee shops, yoga studios, music studios, all sorts of types of sort of more creative economy, small scale uses are able to move into this area, or we're able to move into this area because the land can't command highest and best use, which is typically in cities in the Northeast, housing, or unfortunately surface parking. So the city, and we did do the master plan for this area, and we called out for these designs, and some would call this ugly. I'd call it the ecological picturesque, but So we really have tried to introduce what we call green infrastructure and rain gardens into the street network deliberately, because this area, it does flood, and we need to mitigate stormwater locally, decentralized, before sending it out into the harbor. So it should be noted that just like here in a lot of places, our office is sort of the on-call retained streetscape designers for the city of Portland. So we do a lot of planning, a lot of streetscape design, and work throughout the city. It's a great gig. And here you can see, and I don't know if you have any of these in Scranton, but they do work in the Northeast, and they're terrific. They're highly engineered. This is not just a garden. This is, it may look like a messy garden, but this is engineered just as much as any sewer, street system, or building. But this is really a rain garden when there's infiltration that's controlled and understood, and planted with types of plants can handle the pollution. And then there's certain levels. But these are spread strategically along the Anderson Street to absorb that water and introduce a new typology to the street, introducing this green infrastructure, this open drainage system, going back to that very first picture of Pompeii where you had the open street, and the street was sort of an open drain area. Although they had sewage and drainage mixed together, this is just water. But going back to learning from the past, decentralizing water management, and not just shooting out to the bay as fast as you can, or worse, I know you have this here probably, when you have water that goes to your sewage treatment plant, and sometimes that can overflow because of combined sewer CSOs, and it can then pollute the river. Here's another view of that. Cafe sign at Street Tree. It looks like the medical company across the street wasn't quite so into the ecological picturesque look and mowed down their section. So that's, of course, happens all the time, all the time, as we're dealing with managing urban parks and urban areas. It's just it's the way things are a little bit more fluid with landscapes and buildings. I guess you can paint a building or something, but things seem to change a lot more, and also people tend to feel like they have a little bit more ownership of a right-of-way and will do things into it, not realizing it's strategically done and at great expense and years of thought. And I guess they didn't make the 6 community meetings about this design prior to that. But guess what? A lot of people miss those 6 community meetings, and I don't hold it against them. We all are very busy. But these are some of the funky things that are happening across the street. You have things like the Urban Farm Firmatory, which has become very successful, selling throughout the Northeast, a whole bunch of things that I don't necessarily drink, like kombucha and meads, and you can go in there and they have permaculture events, and it's really about urban farming. And there's now, I'm surprised, things happen in clusters like Silicon Valley or Silicon Alley in New York. There's now 3 to 4 of these types of things right in Bayside area, taking advantage of affordable real estate and buildings. And it's really become, Maine is, and Portland in particular, is really a food city. I mean, it's year after year, it's recognized for that. I think it just won the best restaurant James Beard Award, went to a Portland restaurant. And the region is really a thriving second generation back to land movement with very, very savvy young farmers supported by terrific nonprofits. But what's happening is all that wonderful preservation of farmland is now helping restaurants and things like this thrive in the inner city. So there's this incredible connection between peripheries and the city, almost going back to 19th century pastoralism and agriculture. So it's sort of a revisit to that. And so there's many, many more farmers markets, many, many more sort of value-added kitchens going up, storage areas, distribution centers in the city where food's coming in and then being distributed, but at a smaller sort of artisanal scale. But it's enough to create a whole new economy that really is becoming a significant part of Maine's economy. not anywhere near lobsters or tourism, but getting there. Running with Scissors, you have organizations like that here. They have events. You know, I happened to be down there one day with my girls, and they were doing printmaking with a, you know, street, you know, with a street roller, doing incredible prints. And this is right on Anderson Street. You have, like I said, buildings being repurposed, formerly electrical shop, now a music venue, sort of a funky upholstery place, Lone Pine Brewery. This is just one of 4 breweries along Anderson Street. And then things have also changed in that area, and that nothing wrong with sort of our standard idea of a public art, sort of a piece of art on a plinth in the center of a plaza, sort of radiating out from that. And they serve a purpose throughout Portland and very important squares. There's terrific ties to the past. This one happens to be our beloved lobster thing, but just in case we did not know it was art, you know, there is a plaque that we know it's public art. But no joking aside, the Public Art Commission, and I'm not saying this is any reflection on anything happening here, but it's struggling to find its identity in the 21st century in Portland. They keep looking at older paradigms of what public art can be and should be, and they're completely missing things that can be time-based, that can be community engagement, that can be gardens or ecologically based, could be a community garden, could be you know, something that's planted to help clean up soils, you know, a whole range of things, taking over a block and having dinners, any sorts of things. So let me wind this down. So,
but we need to change over the room for the workshop.
Yeah.
And if we had any, well, I'll let you finish. Sorry.
Yeah, so here's just some of the other arts that are happening here. And I just want to, this is my favorite in the piece. It's a screen this is a large New Manor immigrant population. And then I just love how the text and narratives from the neighborhood kids is used here and creates shadows on the street. So really, this is, I think, sort of the new type of public art that you can see that's sort of integrated with the streetscape and integrated with the culture of the contemporary community. These are kids that literally live, you know, a block away, can walk by, see their words, feel connected to what's happening there, feel like they have an ownership in the community. So it's a I think it's a great way to bring community together with the arts. And of course, they can come back years from now and see their words in place. It's basically, not written in stone, written in core 10, but in the shadows of it on a beautiful sunny day. And then, I won't go through it, but we also design complete streets in this area. And then finally, just 2 pieces of eye candy, a street that we're working on. This, you can envision this like something maybe that would be down in sort of Chelsea area, but it's this wonderful sort of warehouse area right now that's just for an urban area, storage units, and not highest and best use for an urban area, maybe for a more peripheral site in the suburbs. So the city asked us to re-envision what this could be like, reflecting more of the creative economy with green infrastructure. So this is the city's plan. Once the current city manager gets a little bit more comfortable with it, that's one last thing. As you all know, changes in administration. We'll be working on a project that'll take a long time, and sometimes we might go through 2 or 3 city managers, and they all have their own policy agendas, and it may not line up with what you were working on. So this work is here, done, engineered. He'll move on to the next job, and it'll come back to life. I've seen it happen a number of times. Thank you so much. Sorry I dragged on. Thanks.
Have time for maybe 1 or 2 questions, but yes, Jeff.
Are you aware, do you have any writing or conversation on managing changes to zoning regulations, managing change to
So the question is, does he have any publications or writings that he can recommend? Or aware of any that can advise on changing those ordinances? Managing change.
Managing the change. Well, off the top of my head, there's so many, I don't even know where to begin. But if you go to like the APA, American Planning Association website, or the ASLA, American Society for Landscape Architects website. But I will point out one that's probably going to be your best resource, and it's called the Form-Based Codes Institute. Have you guys talked about form-based codes here?
I just love the title. I'm sure some people do here in the
Okay,
audience.
form-based codes are basically sort of like the hottest new thing in zoning. And just if you can go to that, if you can remember that form-based code website, you're probably going to find a ton of resources there about moving into the 21st century zoning, getting away from zoning by use and getting towards zoning by character and what people want to see in their community. Yeah, thanks.
Bob?
With the advent of autonomous vehicles, are you factoring that into your planning equation at all?
Oh, very interesting. No, but
Did everybody hear the question? What was the, what did he say, time? I thought
I really, you mean like the cars that drive themselves, or in the recent interesting sociological experience, the car that appeared to drive itself, and they were just testing to see how people responded to that. I thought that was a fascinating study, absolutely wonderful. That was in DC, I think. No, but you know, I basically, I'm open to embrace whatever comes along, and I'm sure, I mean, I know there'll be pizza drone deliveries, there's going to be autonomous cars, things are going to be happening. So we haven't equated that into it, but I think we have to be flexible to appreciate and expect that to come into play. Thank you.
Well, if there's no other questions, you're welcome to stay. There's plenty of more food, coffee, and hang out while we get ready. If you're staying for the workshop, we're aiming for 11. If everybody's here and we're done earlier, we can leave a little earlier. But for now, yeah, stick around. Part of this is the networking and getting to know each other. And thank you so much. We do have a little Scranton